Growing up in a small cave in central Ohio, I didn't really have much of a connection with video games early in my life. I was too busy playing with Legos or watching Ed, Edd n Eddy or something. However, I do remember the moment when that changed. That fateful day where my life would be intertwined with video games forever. I was in first grade heading to class on the bus, probably huffing magic markers or something, when suddenly, I noticed a kid the seat over, playing with what I didn't know at the time was a Nintendo DS. As curious as a bear cub could be, I went up to him and asked what he was doing. Yeah, I was a dumb kid. Nonetheless, he replied he was playing Pokémon Diamond. I was infatuated with this game. The monsters, the artwork, the bears, the music, the bears, etc. I'm pretty sure Snorlax is a bear. I'm just gonna consider him a bear. I begged my mom for a copy of Pokémon Pearl, I stole my brother's DS, and the rest was history. Christian, if you're watching, by the way, thank you for the DS. The point of this story is to say, the first true instance of video games in my life was with Pokémon. Now, when this script was written, this is when I was gonna dig into the series and all of its flaws and how they don't trim the fat. How its buff and debuff systems serve no purpose and yada yada yada. However, something unexpected happened. The newest Pokémon game, Legends Arceus, fixed most of what I had to initially say. The game is good, and I can't remember the last time I said that about a recent Pokémon game. So today we're going to do a 180. We're going to look at the initial problems I had with Pokémon and see how Legends Arceus fixed them. But first, let's define that trimming the fat thing I mentioned earlier. From the game design courses I've taken at my university, my professor has been very adamant about certain design principles. One of these principles he would always call trim the fat. All this means is that you shouldn't add excessive content or mechanics to a game that won't add anything to its message or cohesiveness. Essentially, everything has a purpose within the game's walls. As a simple example, look at the original Super Mario Bros. From the NES. Through its own limitations, it forces the idea to waste nothing. There is no wasted mechanics or design. Everything has a function. Not to state the obvious, but this is a pretty good game to point at for great design. For the longest time, Pokémon failed on this principle. The entire battle system was a microcosm of this, but let's just look at a specific example, the buffs and the debuffs. In sum, none of them mattered in regular play. And yes, I say regular play here on purpose. In my opinion, competitive and regular play are two different things, so we're just gonna make that distinction here. Buffs are easier to show why they didn't really matter. One of the more critical reasons for this is that there are two fundamental mechanics at odds with each other. First, Pokémon is a game series focused on swapping out monsters to match type coverages. Battles are kinetic in that way, and it's almost a necessity to do so, or you face the chance of a bad type matchup. Now, this is in direct odds with how buffs work. They go away once you swap out your Pokémon. The game presents the player with a choice. Do you keep the Pokémon on the field and hope the opponent doesn't take advantage of your stagnation? Or do you swap and ignore the buff? Given that swapping is a necessity, buffs go out the wayside. Even though they have no turn cap, it doesn't outweigh the cost of a type mismatch. As for debuffs, I'm prepared to admit these are used more often, but not by the player. The NPCs seem to use debuffs frequently in-game from my own experience. Take a shot every time Sand Attack was used on you in early game. However, these are also inconsequential. As mentioned before, when you swap out a Pokémon, they lose their buffs. What I neglected to say earlier is that they also lose their debuffs, essentially rendering the debuff useless. Now, there is an exception to this with moves that have ailments like Poison and Burn, but that still leaves a lot of moves that are useless. This is only one example of a larger problem the series had. In my opinion, it was a big problem, but I can see how some of you may not care about that sort of thing. Pokémon is a gateway RPG, and maybe some of you don't care about those deeper RPG staples. But regardless, how did Legends Arceus fix these problems for me? In my previous version of this video, I suggested a couple of ideas for the series moving forward to fix these issues. One of these was an overhaul to the buff-debuff system. Another was to, essentially, throw the kitchen sink out the window and focus on other aspects of Pokémon. And somehow, Game Freak did exactly what I just said. Legends Arceus steps away from the battling and focuses on the exploration and documentation of different Pokémon. While battling is still there, it isn't the focus of the game. Heck, they even lessen the move count of this game. And even with the lessened importance of battles, they still improved them by adding strong and agile style mechanics as well as battle order changes. This helps create a variety of different situations in battle. But most importantly, when changing its focus, Game Freak went back to the initial concept of Pokemon and its motivations. That being a game where you would collect creatures and trade them with your friends. They went back to their roots, which other Switch games did, and pulled their own spin on it. Of course, battles are still there, but it really doesn't hurt the experience because... Number 1, most battles are wild Pokemon, which take less time to defeat and leave more opportunities to use debuffs for capture or easing the challenge of alphas. Number 2, it makes trainer battles more special. One tends to let flaws go more often when they appear less frequently. Not a perfect justification, but one nonetheless. This isn't to say Legends Arceus is a perfect game, or even a perfect Pokemon game. I think it's justified to give credit when credit is due, and even with Game Freak's lows, they turned out a good one here. At the end of the day, they trimmed the fat, and that's incredible to see as a longtime fan. In all honesty, I don't want them to go back to the old formula. I would even go as far as to say most fans are thinking this given the reception of this versus the Gen 4 remakes. This is the point where Game Freak needs to iterate off, exploration and discovery. Here's to hoping that the next game does this, and if not, oh boy. As anyone who's created art will tell you, while subjective at times, art has objective tools. These tools can be used to help illustrate the point of the piece or enhance the work altogether. These techniques, while varying from each medium, usually play into pathos. Getting your audience to feel something, in my mind at the very least, should be one of your major goals as a creator. If a state of blandness permeates through your audience, then what are you really achieving? Well, unless that was your point, which in that case, good for you, but that's neither here nor there. We call this rhetoric, and noticeably, some tools in rhetoric are used more than others, some not even used at all in recent memory. While it does exist out there, I want to take the time today to talk about a mature device. Frankly, it doesn't seem to be used as much because of marketability, at least in the West. In the gaming world, this type of rhetoric is delegated to those type of games. For the sake of trying to preserve some chance of this video surviving, we're going to refer to this device as titillation. Essentially, this is a sense of sexual excitement or arousal. Through this definition, a shining example in modern day gaming bucks the trend and shows why this rhetoric can be so effective in telling your message. Yes, today we're going to talk about Catherine and its remake Catherine Full Body and how it demonstrates a fantastic use of titillation. Also, let's try to be mature on this topic. After all, it's only human nature. Or bear nature in this case. When a new medium of creativity blooms, titillation and sexual expression are close to follow most times. For example, in film we had The Bridegroom's Dilemma, which came out in 1896. In novels, there was Fanny Hill, which exposed itself in 1748. In music, well, man, that stuff goes as far back as music itself. The same can be said for video games. In the early 1980s, companies like Mystique and PlayAround were releasing titles for the Atari 2600 that acted as pornography for the system. While these titles weren't deep in their messages, heck, some of them were very offensive, it is important to note how far back titillation goes in games and how relaxed the Western environment was to these games existing. It's without saying that the sentiment has changed drastically in the West. However, in the East, titillation in games seems much less taboo. Now, there are pros and cons to this, but that's a topic for another time. But compared to the West, games of this nature are far more abundant. And with enough time to develop like other forms of art, some titles were able to craft finely tuned messages using this rhetoric device. Catherine follows the protagonist Vincent, a man caught in an all too familiar setting of growing up from young adult to adult. His specific situation is where things start to get weird, however, as he ends up cheating on his girlfriend, Catherine with a K, with a stranger, Catherine with a C. In Full Body, another stranger, Catherine with a Q, is thrown into the mix, but their story is a little more complicated. Regardless, Vincent, tormented from uncertainty and guilt, starts to have deadly nightmares involving sheep and climbing blocks. On paper, this game is a unique puzzle platformer with social sim elements. Promiscuous social sim elements. However, the game purposely uses titillation in this way to get the audience to identify with Vincent's situation, as crazy as it may be. At the core of this game, we find the struggle of a man deciding to either grow up or stay youthful or find their own path. This takes the form of different Catherines. Catherine with a K representing maturity, Catherine with a C representing youthfulness, and Catherine with a Q representing individuality. Naturally, this pairs well with Atlas's famous alignment system, but they also have their own enticements here. These enticements help drive home the point that there isn't a right answer objectively, rather it is what you, the player, decide. This, in its own strange way, is similar to the path we find ourselves going down in life eventually. And the game conveys this in a nuanced manner using titillation as the hook. As stated before, art is only as effective as the amount you can grab the audience. Catherine uses titillation to get us on the surface, only to pull us in deeper into its voice and themes. This isn't an argument for every game to start using titillation, and to clarify, there are plenty examples of using this rhetoric for a cheap form of fan service. What developers and gamers alike need to understand is that this tool has merit to tell amazing stories and craft superb games. This industry has grown, it doesn't have to be seen as cheap or immature anymore. If people want to see this art form grow and expand, then companies and players should accept all that comes with it, including the naughty stuff. After all, sexuality is a beautiful thing, so why not express it? And if you didn't take anything from this video, just take this last point that I'm about to make. You spent close to 5 minutes with a cartoon bear who was talking about sexual arousal. According to famed early 1900s actor Will Rogers, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Whether it was this exact quote or some variation or even life experience, we've all heard this before. And I gotta say, it's pretty true. First impressions are vital for establishing connections and putting your best foot forward. The way I see it, a first impression is the seed of a plant. The analogy relationship plan, I guess? I don't know, just hear me out. If you start off by planting that seed in a good place and treat it well initially, then it has potential to grow into something meaningful. If you do the opposite, it can sour things fast and kill off any real connection potentially. Poor plant analogies aside, this idea of a good first impression isn't exclusive to human interactions. Most artistic mediums rely on establishing a great footing with the person experiencing the work. It can be a hook, establishing a setting or a theme, introducing a tone, act as a tutorial, or a combination of all these things. And this can work opposite as well. Nothing is worse than a bad introduction. It can be so detrimental to the point where people will reject the rest of the work entirely. And this has no bearing to the quality of the rest of the artwork, it's just if you can't bring people in, they're not going to experience it. Reeling this back into games, the point I'm trying to make is the Prologue has a lot of power. And with great power, there must also come... Shoot, I forgot the rest. At this point, you're probably asking, what does this have to do with Celeste? And to that I say, I'm getting to it right now, would you just give me a sec? Joking aside, if you can't make an inference from the title, Celeste has one of the best prologues I've seen in modern gaming. This game has a lot of great things going on, but I feel like this aspect of the game gets overlooked. So we're going to shed some light on this intro and show why it's so effective. What makes something good or bad is always different depending on who you ask, so I'm going to lay out what I believe makes a good prologue in a video game. First and foremost, a good prologue sets up the mechanics and rules of the game. This should be pretty self-explanatory, but if the game doesn't teach you the means by which the game operates, then it doesn't matter how good any of it is. What's the point of level 8 if I can't even get past level 1? This is a medium of interaction, so demonstrate it. The famous principle of show don't tell applies here, but at the very least the game should leave no ambiguity on this front. There's a fine spectrum to it all. You don't want to over-explain your controls to the literal point of having your controller on the screen, but you also don't want to just throw your player in the world without having any explanation whatsoever. Second, a good prologue acts as an introduction to the narratives and themes. This again is pretty self-explanatory. A game should start by probing the ideas that it is presenting. Where am I going? Who am I playing? What should I be paying attention to? Etc. Similar to mechanics, this shouldn't be functionally ambiguous. You want to explain just enough to get the story going. You don't want to lay all your cards out at once. Third and finally, a good prologue is as short as possible. I cannot stress enough how much I despise long prologues. Games that take hours upon hours to set up the gameplay or narrative fail on several levels. First off, this immediately allows the player to disengage and go with the motions. After the hour mark, forget it, the player's probably already on their phone. Second, this allows for bad pacing early on, which effectively has the same result as the first point. I'm not saying games should just start and boom, you're ready to go, but it shouldn't take multiple hours to get there. I love SMT and Persona, but dang it, I'm calling you out here. These three major points of prologues are what I find importance in, and Celeste delivers these in spades. First, the prologue of Celeste introduces the fundamentals without any ambiguity: jump, climb, and dash. The game allows the player room to explore with these concepts, even having the environment instruct these controls to the player via Crow. Speaking of the environment, the falling ice block and crumbling bridge are genius ways to indicate the rule to the player that the mountain is always changing, showing that the mountain is somewhat of an antagonist. Second, the player understands the narrative and themes right out the gate. Between the emotional text at the beginning telling Madeline, the player character, to breathe, and the old woman laughing at us about even attempting to climb this mountain, we understand Celeste. We understand where the main character's at, the uneasiness of the mountain, the theme of anxiety, and the desire to climb said mountain. In considering all of this, most importantly in my heart, the prologue of Celeste is refreshingly short. In my own playthrough, and from what I've seen online, the prologue of Celeste is just under 3 minutes on average. It does all of what I previously described in this short of a time span.
God damn, Jimmy, this some serious gourmet shit.
The truest of quality. I fully understand that there are some exceptions to my criteria of a good prologue. For example, Assassin's Creed 2 doesn't adhere to most of what I like in an intro, but I can't help but smile every time I see that logo. There is an underlying reason for it, but that's a story for another time. Getting back on topic, I just wanted to make it clear how Celeste gorgeously demonstrates the power of a prologue. And the funny thing is, and I'm proud to admit it, it's not even the best part of the game. As stated at the beginning of this video, it's just commonly overshadowed. Regardless, it's good to give it spotlight, even if it's only the base of the mountain. As a bear who's quite cozy in their cave, it is only natural that I've developed a fondness for Megami Tensei. We bears don't always sleep during hibernation, and I can't speak for others out there, but I like to spend that time awake playing games. It just so happens that this series of JRPGs offer loads of content and very difficult gameplay that can satisfy me for a winter indoors. Not to mention all the mythological references which remind me of long ago when bears were worshipped with other animals. Ah, good times. But I digress. The newest entry, Shin Megami Tensei V, has been out for a couple months for the Nintendo Switch. I think it was worth the infamous long wait, testifying with solid combat mechanics and beautiful open worlds to explore. However, I've noticed in the public and internal Megaton community's reception that the game's story, themes, and characters are quite lacking compared to the earlier entries. And there are some valid points about this that are being made, heck, I even agree with a lot of them. Yeah, that's right, I'm looking at you, Miyazu. However, I do think it's important to talk about what the game got right in this department. The game did get a lot right, but I want to focus on something more specific. Something that I haven't seen many people talk or bring up when discussing the theme and narrative. This being the relationship between Bells and the central theme of the game, creation, and the bridge between man and creator. You may be wondering why this even matters. This is such a minute detail. This matters because, in short, it shows that the game has great audio conveyance. This basically means that SMT5's sound design and audio blends well with the many facets of the game. In a good game, what you are showing and telling must also be heard, and this is a huge plus if you do it correctly. Therefore, I feel that this has merit to be talked about in the conversation of SMT5. Before I continue, I do want to mention we're going to bring up spoilers today about SMT5. If you haven't played it yet or you're considering to play it, I highly recommend it. Just make sure to come back here when you're done playing. First, let's give some cultural context. In the modern zeitgeist, bells have been associated with religious activity. Most commonly in pop culture, this is framed in the lens of the Judeo-Christian perspective with church bells. In some of the more popular denominations of Christianity, bells serve as a marker for religious congregations, such as Mass. This dates as far back as the 400s AD, where bells were used to signify God's belonging in the lives of each citizen. This presence of bells even has merit in the Bible, where the sound of bells would be a marker of God's blessing and news to the world. Essentially, this was a tiding of holiness. bells. And this isn't exclusive to the Western world either. Plenty of Eastern religions and beliefs had connection with bells and the divine. One such religion is Buddhism. Similar to the summoning in Christian practice, banchos are used to summon monks to worship. Another religion that uses bells like this is Hinduism, where bells are used to ward off evil spirits and demons and let the divine know of the arrival to the temple's sanctum. In some ways, it is also believed to keep the worshipper in focus during prayer. In Shinto, Suzu are also believed to ward off evil spirits as well. However, they also invite kami to enrich the lives of those worshipping in that moment. Now, this is only a small sample size, but you've probably noticed some similarities between each of these practices. Bells, across the board, are signifying a religious bridge between the mortal and divine. There's a connection and bond. Now, this is all well and good and a decent lesson in theology, but what does this have to do with SMT5? I mean, it's in the video, so you could probably guess that this has to do a lot with SMT5. Regardless, throughout the game, the musical cues in certain key moments of divine importance are signified using bells. Even in smaller moments like when the protagonist is leveling up, bells can be heard ringing in the background. As the Nahobino is getting stronger, growing ever so close to the divine potential of the throne of creation, the music cues us as a religious moment of sorts. The human you started the game out as is melting closer and closer to that of Aogami or Susanoo. The bridging between man and creator is getting ever closer as the player is leveling up. This all culminates in the ending theme as the credits roll, where the Nahobino has finally ascended and walks alone in the world they chose. The ritual is complete and the minds have become one. The song's end contains a beautiful arrangement of bells, signifying a holy event has taken place. The birth of a new world, the replacement of the old, and the bridge completing. While we don't know for certain, I have a sneaking suspicion that this audio framing was intentional on Atlus's part. I mean, they put it in the marketing of the game. The inclusion of bells in this way in SMT5 was a deliberate choice to mold the game's theme of ascension with the music. Not every game can do that successfully, and as I stated before, it's quite the important task in this bear's opinion. Video games don't only need to balance their components, but have them work together to create a cohesive vision. SMT5 has that vision, albeit with some bumps in the road. Yeah, I'm still watching you, Miyazu.
Always watching.
I encourage you to give this game a shot and let the bells ring on with the Nahobino's victory. Oh yeah, and before I go, I wanted to make an announcement. At the beginning of this video, I expressed my love for the Shin Megami Tensei franchise. Well, I kinda want to express it more. In fact, I kinda want to dedicate the entire month of May to the series. So, here's what's gonna happen. All throughout May, there's gonna be a Bear Bites mini relating to an SMT game. Sadly, there won't be a proper Bear Bites episode this month, but we're going to end the month on a larger video about a particular 25th anniversary happening within the franchise. I'm sure you can probably guess which series this is. It starts with a P. I am very excited to welcome you all to Shin Megami Tensei. If someone were to ask me an example of a cult series in gaming, I would point to No More Heroes instantly. While it is getting a lot more well-deserved recognition with its conclusion in No More Heroes 3, it's nowhere near the popularity of some of the more friendly faces in gaming. I'm telling you, if a kid can identify Travis Touchdown over Mario or Link, then that kid's gonna grow up to be one messed up person. Fun, but probably messed up. If the intro to this video didn't already convey the special nature of the series, then I'll try to put it into words the best I can. Suda51, the mastermind behind No More Heroes, and his team created a rebellious set of games. At the series' core, it goes against the current. The best word I can use to kinda describe this is punk. I mean, it's easy to say this, you can look at the footage, but what makes No More Heroes so punk? Like all of Bear Bites, I'm gonna give you my observation on what makes No More Heroes stand out like this. In short, No More Heroes is so special because it utilizes an underused tool in video games, this being sampling.
Son of a bitch! Fucking snatcher!
Before going any further with No More Heroes, since the idea is kinda complicated, let's define sampling. In very broad strokes, sampling is the act of taking parts of another standalone work and incorporating them into your own piece. This term and technique is most famous in the art sphere of music. And it's with good reason too, because it originated there with hip-hop in the late 70s and is still used frequently to this day. If you want a good example of sampling, here's a clip of audio from The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash on the Wheels of Steel by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5. If you couldn't tell, this song samples a lot, with famous pieces from Queen's Another One Bites the Dust and Blondie's Rapture. And while record companies would like to say otherwise, sampling and plunderphonics are still going strong to this day. And there's a reason for that. It's a rebellious act in music given the taboo and legal issues surrounding it. But artists still use it because some pieces of music could only exist with the sample in mind.
We live in the post-sampling era. We take the things that we love and we build on them. That's just how it goes. And when we really add something significant and original and we merge our musical journey with this, then we have a chance to be a part of the evolution of that music that we love and be linked with it once it becomes something new again.
See, what makes sampling different from referencing is that a sample is integral to the piece. It is fundamentally dependent. A reference is something that could be taken away with minimal issues. It is fundamentally independent. Wait a second, this is a gaming channel, I'm getting too far deep into my music talk. I mean, this really isn't true because sampling goes way outside of music. It's a technique that a lot of art forms can use, including video games. I'll admit it's a lot more rare to see. A lot of games simply use references. It is a lot easier to pull off because you can throw it in later in production. And this isn't a bad thing, but it can come off a little lackluster. Sampling, however, is baked into the games earlier in the creation process. Like I said before, it's dependent on the thing being sampled, so it makes sense of why it wouldn't be an afterthought. Okay, let's bring this back to No More Heroes. The reason No More Heroes samples rather than uses references is that it's dependent on the worldview of the protagonist, Travis Touchdown. Travis is an otaku, and it makes sense for his paradigm to reflect that defining aspect of his character. The world for him is defined through the things he enjoys. He rides an Akira-styled bike, he uses pro wrestling moves from the matches he watches on TV, and wields a weapon that is one step away from Disney getting their lawyers on the phone. These things are internal, but it's also seen in the world he interacts with. The story of the series has a lot of beats that are, again, pulled straight from Star Wars. It is a big spoiler for the first game, but the finale has some of my favorite portions of this. Also, a lot of the villains are ripped from other media, like Dr. Peace in his use of the Golden Gun, which pays homage to the 007 series, or to a lesser extent the CEO of Pizza Butt from No More Heroes 2. Hell, Fu from No More Heroes 3 is basically evil E.T.
You're going back to your home.
Damon, I love you. In 20 years, I will return.
20 years? You really mean it, Fu? Promise?
Damon, I will return. No matter what. Promise.
Even this type of sampling happens in the gameplay too. No More Heroes 3 contains some of the best of it. The Rank 5 boss fight, for example, starts with a haunted house sequence straight out of a first-person horror game. Spoilers for the finale of the game, but the final battle in No More Heroes 3 is straight up a Super Smash Bros. Match. As I mentioned before, this is integral to the No More Heroes series. It is intertwined with the fabric of Travis Touchdown, and the samples enhance that experience and understanding for the player. They understand his worldview just a bit more. He's a complex character, and there's no doubt this is only a subset of what makes him special, but it's important nonetheless. If you were to take these away, it wouldn't be Travis Touchdown, and subsequently the games wouldn't be No More Heroes.
Look at this blood! We humans are alive, even if we are assassins. Doesn't matter if it's a video game, movie, drama, anime, manga, we're alive! People shed blood and die. This isn't a game!
By the time this video comes out, No More Heroes 3 is still locked to the Nintendo Switch. But later this year, that won't be the case. An all-new wave of people will get to experience the game on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. So, while you wait for 3, why not try 1, 2, and Travis Strikes Again, as different as that last one may be. And if you play them, see how many samples you can spot. I really only named a few of them here, but the games are packed with them. And before you go, just remember to not be a
fuckhead!
Before we start today, I want to be totally upfront with my biases on this topic. I hate NFTs, and I have a list of reasons on why that's the case, but that's not the topic of this video. Frankly, there are more qualified people to talk about that and the harm they pose. But in the past couple of months, NFTs have been invading video games, most recently with the announcement of the Pokémon 1, the first NFT video game console. And there's a lot to unpack there.
Kiss me through the phone!
He copied my whole fucking flow!
Oh,
word for word, bar for bar!
But that's a story for another day, because for all we know, this may not even see the light of day. No, today I want to give my honest reason on why NFTs do not blend well with video games. I would like to think I have some knowledge on the topic of gaming, so I wanted to break this down in a concise, bite-sized manner. And if you agree with what I have to say, that's great, and if you don't, that's also great. Regardless of what side you stand on, this is pretty important to talk about. This makes us ask ourselves what even makes a game, and if this is something we want to see in the development of games in the future. I encourage you to think about these questions yourself and maybe have a discussion in the comments. As for me, this is my own 2 cents on NFTs and video games.
Ah! It's not a liquid! It's a great many pieces of solid matter that form a hard floor-like surface! Ah!
Let me tell you all a story. It may seem unrelated at first, but bear with me. I'm pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with World of Warcraft in some way. It was and still is a gigantic force in MMOs and community play. Personally, WoW has been present a lot in my life, specifically with my older brother who played it for God knows how many hours. Notice how I said played, because WoW over the years has taken a large dip in its player base. But, once upon a time, WoW was the dominant king in the video game landscape, reaching a crazy amount of players and a cultural hold that
some consider to be unnatural.
In its glory, however, there was a dark side that was growing in the depths of the community: gold farming. Like in any online game like WoW, there is an in-game currency that is used to buy items and such. And some, not pointing any fingers, decided to take this to an extreme and create an illegal market that potentially, in its height, generated upwards of $1 billion a year. That is absolutely insane. Chinese players, most of whom were not doing this by choice, would farm the currency and items and sell them to players for real-world currency. This, of course, has been regulated since then, but the point I'm trying to make is that WoW stopped functioning as a game at this point and became a tool. It was an investment for those profiting in these illegal rings. And like history repeating itself, we find this coming to the public's attention again with NFTs and the attempt to incorporate them into gaming. The reason NFTs do not blend well with video games is that it destroys the fundamentals of a game and overshadows it with the goal of profiteering. The simple idea of, I can make money off this, changes the ecosystem of the game and turns it into something else. Some would say it becomes a job, and that's a very appropriate comparison. But in my own mind, there is still a difference. At least in a job, you are guaranteed a paycheck for your work. Regardless of the company's performance or your own, unless you get fired of course, you still get that payout. However, with NFTs, there is risk. You don't know with absolute certainty that you will come out on top with more money than you had initially. NFTs don't turn gaming into work, they turn gaming into gambling. Now, I enjoy gambling when the mood strikes. Heck, I'd be a hypocrite to not say that blackjack is fun. But there is an underlying distinction between video games and gambling. Case in point, take a look at those Vegas-styled video games. I am sure there is one weird person out there, but I doubt that any person who enjoys video games would claim, oh, Vegas Stakes on Super Nintendo is my favorite game of all time. Why is this? It's because the goal of gambling is to profit and come away with more money. There is no real in-between. I mean, you have some gambling incorporated in video games like in some RPGs, but it's never the underlying game, only a minigame or some side hustle. It cannot function on its own without some monetary profit. It's simply not fun at that point. If you doubt that NFTs are only there for making money, as some of you would like to believe, then let me clarify a few things. A non-fungible token is a receipt of digital ownership that is meant to be traded. Like, that's just straight up the definition. I mean, look at any of these transaction sites. The sole purpose is to come out with the most money. It plays off as a gotcha moment. And if you think that any of this can still function without turning games into gambling, let me take you back to the Pokémon 1 I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Do you know the reason why the console made headlines and was passed around on social media? It is because the controller included a wallet button. A wallet button. If that doesn't convey the true intentions behind this, then I don't know what will. I'm gonna be real with you all, I don't like getting negative like this. I truly enjoy talking about things in this art form that we all love and admire, but this is too important not to comment on. NFTs sap the life out of games and devolve them into casinos where only a few come out alive and the others are left in the dust. Luckily, with the recent crashes in the market, hopefully we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But until it's truly gone, consumers and gamers alike must do their part. If you don't want to see video games turn into gambling, then speak with your wallet. Don't support this or any company that tries to attempt this. Simply put, say no fucking thanks to NFTs in video games. I want you to picture this hypothetical for a sec. Imagine you are trying to create a successful prequel. Now, for argument's sake, let's define this as something that establishes meaningful backstory while also building upon existing continuity. Character molding and world building, if you will. As a storyteller, how would you go about this task while also making it so that it isn't boring for the audience? Remember, this is a prequel. We know how these characters and this world will turn out. Giving it some thought, you can see how this is a challenging task. It seems that there's some conflict of interest at work here. You don't want to tread old ground, but you also kinda need to in a way. But let's hold off on this for a sec and discuss something that I'm sure has no bearing on the answer to the question that I just posed. Yakuza is a weird series, and we touched upon it briefly on the channel with the Bear Bites Mini on Like a Dragon. That still doesn't do justice to convey how insane these games are. Hulking men in diapers and epic cabaret club battles are just the tip of the iceberg. You can even fight a bear. The amount of anxiety that this footage gives me is insane. But underneath all that weirdness, these games hold some beautiful design secrets under the hood. One of these, in my opinion, has played a hand in elevating a specific game into fan favorite status, even transcending the series itself. This game in particular is Yakuza 0, and this technique is convergent narratives. And I promise we will not bring up that song in this video. But I will bring up this one.
Justice will break in the law, break in the world,
Convergent narratives. The term may sound academically heavy, but I almost guarantee that you have seen this style of storytelling in television, movies, music, and even other games. Convergent narratives, borrowing from the mathematical term, are stories that have multiple, sometimes seemingly unrelated lines in the narrative that end up converging at some moment or moments. This usually happens towards the end of the story, but there are exceptions. One example in film that comes to mind is Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. The movie spans chapters, usually switching between main characters and their perspectives, like the hitmen Vincent and Jules, the fighter Butch, and the diner robbers. Separately, their individual stories seem loosely connected at best. But as the film goes on, showing events out of order, the audience catches on how this mess of events went about and how each story and arc connects with each other. This storytelling structure, like any good tool, has quite a few use cases. Sometimes when the narrative and themes are just too big for one character to take on, it may be best to split it up across different characters at different points. Want to get multiple perspectives on your massive complex world? Split the narrative and converge to drive home that this world is a singular unit. Most of the time, this is why convergent narratives are used in prequels of all things. We have our convergence from the audience perspective, we know where the narrative will end up. Splitting it in the prequel allows for a more dynamic storytelling experience. It shakes things up a bit and lets the audience say, oh, so that's how it happened. It breaks new ground while treading old ground. We can have our cake and eat it too. So, how does Yakuza 0 exemplify convergent narratives? In a structural sense, the game is divided into two parts. Kazuma Kiryu's story, the man who will become the main hero of the series, and Goro Majima's story, the man who will become the main anti-hero of the series. Taking place in different areas and having different goals at first, the game coaxes the audience to believe their stories are more anthology-based. This allows for the game to show what the lives of these men were like before the events we've come to accept throughout the series. But either as a veteran or a well-eyed player, we know their paths will eventually cross and their lives forever intertwined. Like, come on, we know Majima is gonna say Kiryu-chan in the first Yakuza. As the game progresses, a sense of unease is built from the stories leaving marks on the other narrative's line. Traces of Kiryu's consequences are being felt by Majima and vice versa. This all culminates into an amazing final act where both lines converge into a single climactic battle with Titanic-sized drama. And as the ashes fall, we see the Kiryu and Majima that we know and love. Most of the events in the game can be inferred to some degree, yet it's still engaging even if you knew what the final outcome was. As I stated before, we break new ground by treading old ground.
俺らにできるのは立ち止まって泣くか一歩でも前に進むかの二つだけだ
Yakuza 0 uses a convergent narrative structure to elevate itself as a prequel. While it's not a perfect game, I do consider it a perfect prequel. It tells us about the world before our own preconceptions from past games by using multiple perspectives. It tells us about the characters we adore and how they got that way in the fashion that isn't cut and dry. And it recontextualizes the series to make aspects more dynamic and deeper. For example, before Zero, Majima was just an eccentric anti-hero that was a roadblock for Kiryu at times. After Zero, without spoiling, Majima has been recontextualized to be someone who suffers from their past actions and guilt. In a sense, it makes the audience look at the franchise in a fresh and welcome viewpoint, and that's why it's considered one of the best games by the fandom. For part of that, you can thank Convergent Narratives. You're traveling to a dimension that no gamer dares to go. Not because of the fright of what they know, but of what they don't know. And in 2022, some may not even get this parody at all. But regardless, your next stop, the Bear Bite Zone.
You see what I mean? You see that? The right English, the right draw, perfect position, right? What do I get? Fats Brown, that's what I get. Fats Brown. Well, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of hearing his name. I'm the best pool cue on Randolph Street. Me. Jesse Carter, and you know that. All right. All right, Fats was good. I mean, he was good, right? But he's dead. You hear me? He's dead. He's been dead for over 15 years. But every time I turn around, I hear his name.
Pictured here is a tale as old as time, relatively speaking. Greatness outshined by greatness before, the young so eager to be seen as the best. The comparison to be made, the genre definer, the game of games. Soon you'll realize that being the best at anything carries its own risk, in or out of the Bear Bite Zone. As any JRPG fan has come to know in recent years, Persona 5 has lived on as an undead monster of sorts. It's a great game, sure, no one is denying that, but its initial reach has gone far beyond its own life. As for evidence, look no further than the humble game journalist. These articles and videos seem to have a fixation on comparing Persona 5 to any JRPG that comes out with even a hint of similarity. It has gotten to the point that it's even clouded the judgment of Persona 5. Rather than seeing it as another good game,
which it is,
we praise it to unrealistic standards, which in turn brings challengers to the table. Fans and games alike come clawing and gnashing to be the very best and challenge the golden standard. And some even get their chance. But let's ask a preliminary question. Why are we using it as a gold standard in the first place? To answer this, let's focus back on the humble game journalist. With little to no qualifications or barriers for entry, the game journalist seems to have freedom at first glance. Freedom that, some may think, would generate better reviews. It's an open opinion from a fresh perspective. What could go wrong? Well, quite a bit actually. No barriers also means that the reviewer can have zero context on the thing that they're reviewing.
And there are even a few post-game surprises to keep you training the Pokemon you actually want to train long after you're done with the more superfluous HMs.
Now in some cases this can be a good thing, certain pieces of media function and benefit from standing on their own. But there's a number of times where context is needed to be able to review a game. And if you're a game journalist, the amount of context you'll need to cover all your bases from your Marios to Metal Gears is unachievable. Even if you play a game every day, you will have blind spots. Compounding this issue is the fact that most game journalists are not self-employed, rather they work for a company like IGN or Kotaku. Not only do you lack the freedom to choose what game lands on your desk to pump out a review, but you have to rush. Given the nature of review embargoes and the push to get your review out before your competitors, you are lucky to get 2 or 3 weeks to play and finish a game, write a review, and have it looked over and edited and finally published. For some games, this is doable, like I can imagine a platformer getting justice in that time frame. What about Xenoblade Chronicles? What about Tales of Arise? What about Shin Megami Tensei V? That is a task that most people could not accomplish, myself included. So what do? We cut corners. The act of comparing A to B is useful to convey your point because if you're familiar with B, you'll get an idea of what A is like immediately. You, the reader, fill in the gap. You do the work for the writer. It is so prevalent in video games that we even do it in conversation. How often when trying to convince someone to play a game that you say a phrase like, "Oh, it's like blank but darker," or "It's like blank mixed with blank." It feels natural. So as a writer, what do you pick from to help illustrate your point that guarantees readers will know what you're talking about? You pick the Persona 5s, the games that have such clout attached to their name, whether by merit or hype, that they can convey your points. But what if the comparison isn't valid? This is the start of what I like to call the Persona 5 effect. The journalist companies crunch their writers. The writers desperately write to meet deadlines and thus cut corners. The games they use to compare are thrown haphazardly into the fray to draw some resemblance of shared knowledge from writer to reader. Thus, this pisses off a lot of people because of twofold. 1, the comparison may not be valid to make in the first place for a variety of different reasons. And 2, it looms over the fans of the reviewed game, never being the standard, always being second place.
Means a lot to you, doesn't it? Even as a dead man. Have your name up there, the unbeatable champ of all times.
The golden standard is solidified and the cycle continues. So we acknowledge this effect, but can we stop it? Is there a future in game journalism where the Persona 5 effect is no more? Sadly, I don't see that happening. On one hand, there's the crunch. If we somehow got rid of that and replaced it with a more writer-friendly environment, then maybe there'd be a chance. But this is asking a lot for a company to do. I'm sorry, I just don't put my faith in companies to do the right thing. On the other hand, we have to contend with the nature of greatness. As long as greatness exists, there will always be those who challenge it. As long as that goal is in sight, there will always be those who chase after it. The status quo is a consequence of in-between periods of change. People, including you and me, take comfort in those comparisons of the best, some even striving to be in the very same conversation. But I think the question that we really need to ask is if it's even worth it. All those eyes on you from down below, each a new enemy, while you stand alone on your big mountain. Do you really want your game to be the next Persona 5? Or maybe even the next Dark Souls? Because I can guarantee you that you are getting more than what you bargained for.
Jesse Carter. And now, I'm the best. And I'm gonna stay the best. Because nobody's ever gonna take it away from me. Nobody ever!
So to each gamer out there wishing for their game to be the very best, consider that there is a special place for your game and others like it in the Bear Bite Zone. Here's a question. What makes something so frustrating to people that they will actively complain to anyone within an earshot while also coming back to the same exact thing? The answer isn't drugs, but recently I've had my own addiction to a little game called Splatoon 3. And I can go on and on about this game, heck there may even be a video in the works, hint, hint. But this draw got me thinking about why I was hooked, what was baked into the formula that made it so appealing yet so frustrating at times. Now this answer is totally subjective, but you'll come to find, like I did, that this type of game design shows up quite a bit in the industry. In fact, you can even argue it's at the core of every good game, albeit some may express it more than others.
Yeah, because I'm playing really fucking hard, these guys do nothing still.
Let's see if we can find the answer together by looking at an example. Since we were already talking about it for a bit, let's take Splatoon 3, specifically Turf War. I'm sorry for all my fellow salmon run enjoyers out there, the chads that you are. But please bear with me. For those of you out there who don't know anything about Splatoon, Turf War is the signature mode of the game. You and 3 other players face off against another team of 4 with the simple goal of covering the most ground with your ink. It has some of the gameplay that you would come to expect when playing a shooter, like killing enemies and getting specials and such, but that's basically it. Like I said, simple. So if it's so simple, let's apply that question that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. To solve this, let's strip the gameplay back bit by bit until we find the core. You could say this is
like onions.
They stink?
Yes.
First, let's get rid of the other teammates. Now we have a one-on-one, and personally, I can't say this destroys the core of the mode. While it doesn't have any of that signature video game online camaraderie that we've all come to know and love, it's still a functioning version of Turf War. Next, let's take away all the different weapon types, so default weapons from here on out. And to speed this process along, why don't we take away the specials as well, and even the splatting of enemies? We are definitely left with something less fun and a bit homogeneous, but again, we still have a functioning game. So let's take one more thing away, the ink covering mechanic. In this hypothetical, when you land ink on the ground, it's yours for good. The enemy can't take it away from you anymore, and you can't take away their spots either. So what you're left with is no conflict. Why interact with the other person when that gains no advantage anymore? There isn't a push, and there isn't a pull.
No contest!
Okay, so pushing and pulling in games seems pretty intuitive to understand, to the point that people don't really even think about it. It's like breathing air or getting Wawa. But do not confuse this mutual understanding with this being unimportant. Pushing and pulling, the act of player A creating conflict with player B in the gaming space, is what keeps us playing while also being so anger-inducing. In its most obvious form, it's trench warfare, and that's the exact reason Splatoon is such a good example to use to demonstrate push and pull. We break the middle ground, we lose the middle ground, they push to our base, we fight back, and all of this is happening while the timer is ticking down. It's just so... And as a side note, if you want to know what this looks like without a timer, may I point you to WoW's All-Track Valley, which I'll link a video for in the description. And since I just mentioned a Blizzard property, yes, Overwatch does exemplify the push and pull as well, but only if you stay on the damn payload! To get back on topic, pushing and pulling isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It's a concept that designers tinker with constantly. Too little of it and you get a scenario that I described earlier, but too much of it, you build up a large amount of what we call friction. Friction in large quantities is the unwanted side effect to your pushing and pulling. It's wasted energy coming from players that feel that their efforts are not worth the reward at the end. And the result is that they quit, they give up entirely. It's when frustration wins over fun, so as a designer, you need to tune your game to try and find that right amount of push and pull. You want some friction, because that's how you get the addicting yet frustrating experience, but again, you're walking on a tightrope. And now that you, the listener, are more aware of this concept and struggle, you can now answer that question that I was asking myself when playing Splatoon 3. And hopefully your answer isn't drug-related. Don't do drugs, kids.
And if you do drugs, you go to hell before you die.
Oh god, I'm never gonna get this done in time. Oh, hey guys, happy holidays! Gosh, I love this time of year. Everyone's just so jolly and... Oh, you seem disappointed. Is it something I said? Oh, I know what it is. You guys want your present, don't you? Well, to be honest, it's gonna take some time. No, wait, don't leave, I promise it's coming. It's just gonna be here a little late. Like a couple of months late. Hold on, don't go yet, don't go yet. I still have something for you guys. Just because I've been hard at work doesn't mean I forgot all about you. After all, not only is this the 10th episode of Bear Bites, but it's the holidays. So, I decided to take some fan requests from you all. Yes, even you. Each request is represented by one of these stockings, 3 in total. We'll go through one by one in a lightning round of sorts, talking about my general thoughts on these games. So, let's get started. Don't give me that look. Out of all the games in the Metal Gear series, I never thought this would be the one I would talk about first. Yet, here we are. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is one of those games that fans seem to praise, but most of them have never played. Which is a damn shame, because those accolades are well earned. While the first Metal Gear would be considered outdated to a general audience, I would argue that Metal Gear 2 would surprise both newcomers and fans trying to dive deeper into Kojima's work. For a PC game coming out in 1990, it offers advanced tactical gameplay and a decent story that holds up. It takes place 3 years after the first game, in Zanzibar land. Solid Snake has to infiltrate the country as intel has suggested that a very important scientist named Kyo Marv has been kidnapped and held hostage there. Not only does the young soldier learn more about the conflict he's intervening in, but over time things point to the idea that maybe everything in the first game wasn't resolved. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the plot, but trust me in saying that this was leagues ahead of the competition at the time. The same can even be said about the gameplay. Unlike the first game, enemies will actually notice you when you're in their relative field of vision. Certain landscapes like metal and sounds from weapons can even alert the guards. This can make for a decent challenge, but of course you're given some new tools as well to fight back. The biggest addition regarding this is the implementation of crawling. The map has pockets and crevices that allow for Snake to crawl under and get out of dodge quickly. As someone who is watching this video in the current day, this may not seem like a lot, but this was revolutionary at the time. It was so dynamic and it made gameplay about espionage feel like actual espionage. As for fans of the Solid portion of the series, this may all look surprisingly familiar to you, especially if you're a fan of Metal Gear Solid 1. Look, I'm not the first to bring attention to this, but I still think it's not as well known as it needs to be. Metal Gear Solid is heavily inspired by Metal Gear 2, which I will demonstrate by this fast-scrolling list. A lot of the attributes and innovations people give to Solid are not accurate, which brings me to say this. Metal Gear 2 is the game that I think the Metal Gear series really came into their own, commercially and artistically. If you're looking to get into the series, I would start here. Not only has the game aged well, but the plot is important to later games. And if you're a fan of the Solid games but are tired of waiting for Konami, then I would give this one a shot. Also, this game takes place on Christmas Eve and has a weird amount of tie-ins with Christmas, so yeah, good timing on this one. I'm gonna need all the good timing I can get. I got so much to do. Ho ho ho, this game, this beautiful game. Honestly, this would have been my game of the year if it wasn't for Neon White. I don't care that it's a remake of a Super Famicom game, it is just that awesome. In fact, I plan on making a full episode on Live Alive eventually, but I want to bring attention to this game before the year is out. Partially this was because it got nominated at the Game Awards for RPG of the Year, so please go and give it some love. There are two main reasons why I'm hyping this game up. One, it is well warranted, but I'll get into that in a sec. The other reason is that Live Alive has been in translation hell for almost 30 years. It's been a Japanese exclusive JRPG, and for people that know me, that kinda hits a soft spot of mine. Good sales figures for these kinds of untranslated games could set a precedent. These are the type of things that I like to encourage, so if you're just curious about what Western audiences have been missing, then check out Live Alive for yourself. I'll also link a video in the description that goes more into its history. Okay, enough rambling, let's get back to the first point. What is Live Alive? Like I said, it's a JRPG, but it has some special characteristics that are not normal for its genre. It's an anthology game split into 7 main stories spanning across all of human history and beyond. From cavemen to robots, Live Alive has the player choose between 7 different protagonists for each of these stories. On top of that, each story has its own mechanics and motifs as well. For example, the portion of the game that takes place in Edo, Japan has the player choose to play as a pacifist or a killer ninja. You can either kill each enemy you face like a traditional RPG, or sneak around and find ways around the compound without harming a soul. And this isn't just for show, many of the story and gameplay elements change depending on what you decide. Without spoiling anything, all of these stories have a common thematic element tying them together. This being the human condition. Across all of time, each character represents a good mode of human experience. Using Edo, Japan as an example again, the story questions the relationship between peace and war. Can peace exist without the persistence of conflict? Don't we need protectors for security? And by that logic, are they any better than those trying to cause the conflict in the first place? I won't get into answering these questions now, again, Live Alive deserves its own video. But while you wait on that, give the game a shot yourself. Just don't look at Nintendo's marketing for the game because they spoil a massive twist. But yeah, Live Alive is a very special game, a video game that pops up once in a generation and inspires Megalovania. Yeah, I know you dirty Undertale fans heard that one, I know what makes you turn your head, I got you, I get you, I know what gets you going. Okay, one more to go, one more to go, one more to go, you got this, you went to Bear College, damn it, you can do this!
Yeah!
Anyways, this is such a weird one to be requested, but who am I to deny this classic? For those who don't know, Crazy Taxi is the first game in a series of arcade racers. Developed by Sega, this game was first released in arcades in 1999, and then the Dreamcast as an early release in 2000. It's been quite a while since I last played this game, so I had to pop it into my Dreamcast to double check if my memory was correct. And yeah, it was mostly correct. Crazy Taxi isn't a traditional racer by any means. The whole goal of the game is to pick up and take people to their destinations across the town. The player would get bonuses if they could drive to the destination in a timely manner and in a stylish way. Hence the name Crazy Taxi. Again, this is an arcade game through and through. There isn't a story or progression, only the driving factor of getting your ranking and total earnings up. From my understanding, the main appeal of this game, and most likely the following ones, are the aesthetics. Crazy Taxi is a time capsule and emits such an insane energy with rocking 90s jams and over-the-top presentation leading the charge. If you are looking for something to remind you of the early 2000s, this may be your game. In some of my recent playthroughs, I wouldn't even try and complete the task. Part of this is because I absolutely suck at this game, but the other part was because I just enjoy the atmosphere. Since you get full reign on exploration of the town, it's honestly just fun to fuck around and take in the old flair. And even the in-game ads add on to this. Something about seeing the old Pizza Hut and KFC designs just scratched a nostalgic itch for me. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm just so brainwashed by capitalism that even the sight of old corporate logos brings a small amount of joy to me. Oh, sorry, yeah, back to Crazy Taxi. While I'm not the best at this game, I would give it a shot if any of this piqued your curiosity. I believe it's only $8 on Steam. Consider it a good time waster, heck, it may even give you memories of a better time. It sure did for me. Well, that about does it. Honestly, the holidays this year have been super stressful for me, but I'm glad we were able to do this. What? What do you mean I forgot something? Oh, yeah, I forgot a stocking here. My bad, guys. Let's, see what we got here. Motherfucker. Fortnite is a popular battle royale game developed by Epic Games. You and 99 other players compete as different characters to achieve the #1 victory royale. Some of these characters include Kylo Ren, the Joker, Spider-Man, LeBron James, Rick Sanchez, Morty Smith, Naruto, John Wick, Master Chief, Ryu, Superman, Silver Surfer, Ariana Grande, T-1000, Travis Sicko Mode Scott, Goku, Jill Valentine, Boba Fett, Rick Grimes, Lara Croft, Marshmallow. I'm sorry, guys. I can't do this anymore. Happy holidays. See you next year.
Let me be the one that you cling to. Let me be the one that you call on. Let me, oh, let me, girl. Let me take care.
If je maar of dan was ik niet. Dus dat je of en die was zo veel van